Good evening and welcome to tonight's edition of Fact Sheet. A Tuesday evening, and every Tuesday evening on ETV, we discuss the facts, we discuss the issues here. If it's not a fact, we don't touch it. And tonight we are talking about a very important aspect when it comes to conversations about the welfare of our nation, especially looking at how COVID-19 is wreaking havoc across the world. And how, as we speak now, the numbers are spiking, and there are fears that we may get to the point where the government will be forced to lock down again. But in anticipating all of these things, the people who ensure that as we speak now, the engines keep working and rolling are the people who trade, the people who do business, the private sector, the industries. They are the ones who are keeping the nation afloat. Throughout the beginning of the year, we've been focusing our attention on the economy and the prospects for the economy, but we can't talk about the economy without talking about the business industry, without talking about traders, without talking about industry players. And so tonight, we are taking a look at COVID-19 and its impact it's had on us in terms of the prospects for business and the year 2021. We're looking at the growth, innovation, sustainability, and profitability. And if you followed the headlines of the newspapers this morning, almost all the newspapers, which have their roots in business, were focusing on the economy. For instance, if you check the Economy Times, this morning it talks about Ghana's debt stock reaching 286 billion and banks being robust enough to stand an external shock, which is coming from the Bank of Ghana. It talks about the IMF forecasting end of year inflation rate being around 8.7. The business analyst talks about, the public debt, fiscal deficit rising sharply, banks lending rates falling, and several other stories. If you look at the Business and Financial Times as well, it talks about the pandemic and the second wave pushing Bank of Ghana's decision to stay the policy rates, and several other stories that came in the media today. If you follow the World Bank UNDP report and the Ghana Statistical Service report 2020, it talks about the fact that almost about 35.7 companies were shut down at the time the lockdown was implemented. It speaks about how almost about 16.1% of these companies, even after the easing of the restrictions, also shut down. Tells you businesses were highly impacted by COVID-19. Tonight, we'll speak to the industry players to find out what the prospects are going into the year 2021. Looking at the first quarter budget that was presented last year by the finance minister, what do they look forward to, especially when we're being told debt to GDP is around 74.7% at the moment? If you want to know how far we'll go with this conversation, I encourage you to stay with us even as we delve deeper into this issue. My name is Samuel Shen, and I welcome you to the discussion. All right, so you're welcome back to Fact Sheet live on ETV, also live on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram as well. Would like to hear your comments, your thoughts, and your views, even as we start the conversation tonight. And as already indicated, today our focus is on business and the prospects for business. What they envisage the government would do in terms of trying to stimulate growth in the economy with COVID-19 still lurking around the corner. The concerns are being raised by the health professionals, and everyone is concerned about the rate at which the numbers are going up. So tonight my guest to help me deal with the issues are Mr. Seth Twum Akwaboah. He is the CEO for the Association of Ghana Industry, and Mr. Mark Bedu Abuaji, CEO for the National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And gentlemen, good evening and welcome to the discussion. I trust you're doing well.
Yes, great.
All right, so let's begin the conversation by looking back the year 2020. How did business fare?
Well, generally speaking, it was a difficult year. We began the year quite well with a lot of expectations. Normally when it's getting to an election, in an election year, normally businesses, become happy because demand generally grows. But then, so the first quarter was quite positive. But immediately after the first quarter, then the pandemic struck. So since then, there were a lot of uncertainties in the system. And then eventually, businesses were affected in different ways. Demand generally fell. Demand for various goods fell, especially during the lockdown period. Afterwards, people were concentrating on products that are of critical and essential nature. So the luxury products, were not being in demand that much. Then after the lockdown, there were restrictions on weddings, funerals, and mass gathering, and these are all platforms for generating demand. So you can imagine that companies producing the beverages and all the products that are for mass consumption were severely affected. There were also challenges along the line as to even getting the raw materials, because other countries were also locking up. So going outside to transact business, and some instances, companies actually physically travel to inspect the goods that they are importing. So that also had an effect. So generally speaking, it was a difficult year. And this was also proven through some surveys we did. We had our own business barometer survey we normally do. And in the third quarter, clearly confidence level dropped, largely because of the pandemic. So really businesses were affected. I'll have to add quickly though that there were a few businesses that did well, because the pandemic also brought its own opportunities. Those producing hand sanitizers and a few products, some of the pharmaceutical products, the PPEs, and a few other things. So, but that positive development was not big enough to offset the negative side. And therefore, in general, businesses didn't do that well.
But could the convex not be said to be true as well, considering that, for instance, products that were in the market already, as a result of the anticipation, for instance, that there was going to be a lockdown, we saw food prices that had been imported already going up. People had a windfall opportunity. Businesses that had stock of certain goods and products had a windfall opportunity to have benefited within the period when the COVID-19 struck. Would that not also hold true? So
that would be true only for the very few who had access to those opportunities. If you had enough stock at the time, perhaps it gives you the opportunity because you can have the prices a little bit. But then if you didn't, what happens? And when we are talking, we're talking the generality or the majority. And I'm saying that the general view or assessment was that businesses really didn't do that well. There are a few that definitely benefited from that windfall. Indeed, when the countries were locking up, there are certain products that we were ordinarily consuming through importation, and people could not import any longer because there were challenges with the importation. So naturally, local companies that were producing substitutes of those products would then have an advantage. But in spite of all those advantages that were encountered or experienced, it wasn't big enough to offset the negative side. So when you put it together in your assessment, obviously it was negative. And indeed, when we interviewed our companies, about 80% of them said they were negatively affected by the pandemic. So generally speaking, it was a difficult year. Latter parts, we saw some improvements, especially because we're getting to Christmas. And normally, in the last quarter of the year, especially around the Christmas season, businesses, improves a bit. And then also the elections, pumping in more money here and there. So that also improved the situation. So that's what saved the situation a little bit. But if you do the numbers, the general impression and assessment is that businesses didn't do that well last year.
Mr. Akwaboah, as much as I share the views expressed by, Mr. Akwaboah, at the point in time we saw government's effort at stimulating growth, where, for instance, the NBSSI came in, where some facilities were given some of your members to ensure that they're able to pick up. These supported your businesses in order to pick up again, didn't it?
Well, to a large extent, I think it did. The reason being that during at the peak of the pandemic, most of the businesses went down. Sales was very, very low, to the extent that the research that we did, we realized that the SMEs were losing close to 22,000 per annum, and the quantum increases as the size of the business increases. So most of them were not having revenue, so to speak, to even pump back into their businesses. So they were looking for opportunities to at least get something to sustain themselves. So the facility from MBSSI came in handy, but the issue had to do with how much they received and which industries this support went to. If you look at how much they lost in terms of sales and how much was given to them, you realize that it was very small. Some receive as low as 1,500, and if SME, if I've lost close to, let's say, 22,000 as sales and you're receiving 500, there's no way it was going to resolve the issue. But I think it helped in a way. When the relief for electricity and water and all those things came in, I think they also supported, because the money that you would have used to pay for all those things, government has in a way taken up that bit of it. So it was very good, but I think that they could have done more. The monies could have been increased, or the support could have been increased, so that the business at least will be able to sustain themselves and also move forward beyond the period that we have. So the government support was okay. I think the Bank of Ghana also came in terms of reducing their policy rate from 16.5 to 14.5, which resulted in somehow a reduction in the interest rate. So the banks were also supportive. People were able to access certain funding to also pump back into their businesses. So all this support, I think that they were very relevant, but we could have done more for the private
The point
sector.
you made about the monetary policy rate from 16 point something to 14.5 around now, did it necessarily reflect in terms of the ability to access loan facilities at the banks at the time till the latter part of the year 2020? Was it reflecting?
Yeah,
Did it translate?
You realize that the policy rate, the effect of the policy rate on the lending rate is very minimal. So you would have a situation where they will reduce the policy rate, but it will not have immediate direct impact on the lending rate. There were some banks that decided to reduce their lending rate as a support to businesses. There were some banks that also decided that they will restructure the payment for businesses. So you were supposed to pay interest and principal within that period. There was an agreement that you can postpone the payment. So the money that you were supposed to have paid to the banks, you would have fallen back into your businesses. So I think in a way it helped. If you look at the recent information from Bank of Ghana, it's clearly indicated that the lending rate as a result of the reduction in policy rate had also gone down. But it depends on the bank and your risk profile as a business. So some businesses actually benefited from that.
All right, now the point you're making about, you know, how much loans you are getting from the banks and the support that had come, that bit about moratorium, which the banks were giving some of your members who were borrowing from the banks and who had already taken facilities from the bank. How widespread was this? Because we had heard news last year that some banks were giving some moratorium, some arrangement with your members to ensure that they stay either interest rates that you're supposed to pay. How widespread was it?
Yeah, it was, but it differs from bank to banks. There were banks that I know that they were very supportive, so they provided this support, the moratorium, to businesses. There were others that the level was not that impactful. So it depends on you as an individual. There were some businesses that also prefer that they will pay for the loan and then the interest. So that it also depends on the individual businesses and the banks as well. But in a way, as small as it is, and looking at what we were going through, whatever financial support that any business would have received would have gone a long way to help that particular business to survive and to grow at that particular point.
Mr. Akwaboah, let's fast forward and look at today. COVID-19 is here, a second wave. We are all concerned about it. What expectations do you have as industry players of government in terms of the direction you expect government to go?
Well, first of all, let me say that the uncertainty is not good. Businesses work with certain projections and predictions in mind. So you need to be able to envisage that in the next 3 months, 6 months, this is how my business arrangement is going to be. If I'm importing certain volumes. If I'm taking orders, I'm taking certain order. And then if I'm borrowing money, I'm borrowing with a certain expectations and calculations. Beginning the year, people have projected up to the end of the year. So the expectation, generally speaking, would have been that I have my plans, I want to work towards it. The challenge we have now is that there's a lot of uncertainty in the system. As of last week, even though the pandemic was there, business was normal, just this Sunday, there's an announcement of some further restrictions. Who knows what is going to happen in the next couple of weeks to months and all that. Maybe to open up a bit more, maybe it's going to be closing up again depending on how the situation goes. So I would say that, first of all, the greatest concern of businesses is about the uncertainties in the system. When we do our business barometer analysis, we calculate what we call the confidence level. And a major element in the calculation is the expectation of the business people concerning the business environment in the coming quarter. So when the expectation is there's a lot of uncertainty, it always drops the confidence level down. So I can imagine that if we do the current quarter, because of the uncertainty, it will come down. So it is the biggest challenge. But having said that, businesses have plans. They are working towards it. They break their plans into quarters, into months, into weeks. And for those that are doing sales, they are monitoring their sales.
Not to interrupt you, but the point you make about uncertainties, now I'm trying to wrap my mind around it as to how that necessarily impacts on you, because I'm thinking that even last year when the lockdown was in force, when our borders had been shut, goods and services were coming into the country through our ports. Ships were bringing in container shipments of goods into the country, and technology had abounded at the time that we could use our usual Zoom and co to trade with our business partners in terms of business transactions. So I'm trying to understand where the uncertainty comes from.
Okay, no business will close shop because it's not sure of what's going to happen. So you can imagine that people will still do business, people will still plan, people will still work at it. The uncertainty comes in when you cannot predict the volumes you will produce, the volumes you will supply, where the next turnover is coming from. That's where the uncertainty comes in. It's more about the volumes and the planning around it, because you always project and plan and work towards it. If it's about employees, how many people, if you had plans to maybe expand and employ a certain number of people, and you are not sure of how the business is going to be, would you take the risk of employing more people? You probably wouldn't. If you are taking certain orders, you are not sure of whether the supply chain will work well enough, you be cautious. So those are where the uncertainty comes. Those enterprises that are in the event organizing industry and all that. Today, what has happened? Suddenly, if you are even taking orders, you cannot go ahead with it. So this is where the uncertainty comes. But generally speaking, of course, I said that much as there is uncertainty in the system, no business will close shop. You do everything possible to survive because you must keep your business going. So in the midst of the pandemic and the challenges, you will still work around it such that you'll be able to do the little you can and survive. So in that sense, yes, people are working hard, and they are just hoping that the situation will improve and they'll be able to do business. And as I did indicate last year, even though we had a lot of challenges, some companies did well. They did better. Those in the ICT industry, those in the telecoms, and I know one small enterprise that is at the best of turnover last year than ever before, because the nature of his service related to something that requires electronic service and all that, and that is his business. So he actually had a windfall. So those ones are there. Generally speaking, others will be affected, others will be okay, but I'm saying that the uncertainty has an effect on your projections, your plans, and your development. And in terms of planning, I mean, all along, people have been looking for investment. Today, going around the world, canvassing for investment, talking to your potential partners, it's not that easy. People traveling around, even though there's still some travels going on, it's limited a little bit. We all know that. So all have an effect on businesses. But people will still work hard. People are still keeping hopes alive. And then they believe that things will change along the line and then be able to do business and survive.
Mr. Bache, as a chamber, what feedback do you get when you're trying to resuscitate networks that otherwise had gone cold as a result of COVID-19 last year? What feedback do you get?
Well, I think, as Seth rightly said, getting to the latter part of last year, when Ghana and other countries actually reduce the restrictions and open up their borders, the airport, things started picking up. For the whole of last year, usually we do a lot of business to business and investment missions and other things. For the whole of last year, we couldn't do any until the last bit where people started showing interest and asking questions, and we started linking them with our members. So we were hoping that 2021 will be a good year. Actually, we are still hoping. So our members, in terms of their links, is still low. They are looking for opportunities to do that. But what really helped along the line is technology, because meetings that were supposed to have been held face to face, and because of COVID, we couldn't do it now. You can do it via Zoom and also Skype or whatever platform that we want to. For the first time, I was surprised to see that we can even do trade fairs and trade missions online. So we have trade fairs with the product being exhibited online, and Ghanaian companies can participate in it. And if you want to contact somebody or do business, you are free to do that through technology. E-commerce also came in at a point in time. That is the only way so to speak, to break the restrictions and also improve on demand for products. So technology for me was the key to survival last year, and also it's still the key to survival during this difficult moment.
Do you get the sense your business partners have confidence in our economy to rebound?
Yes, they have confidence in our economy. In fact, it's not only Ghana, the only country struggling. Other countries are struggling, and I think we have even done very well in terms of how we have managed the COVID and managed our economy. If you look at the projections from an estimate from rating agencies, from the IMF, and you realize that they are projecting that 2020 our growth would be around 4%, and I think it's a positive sign. So they have confidence in our economy that very soon, when things the COVID slow down, now I think we have vaccine and all those things. When they start deploying, and Ghana happens to get it, as was announced by the president, we get it March in June, and we start also ensuring that all of us, we adhere to the protocols and reduce the numbers of the COVID infections, then probably we will get a lot of people coming. But the confidence is still there, just that people are being cautious. There's uncertainty surrounding what is this that if I invest in Ghana and I'm going to get, how is the COVID going to be? How is my business partners faring? Those uncertainties are still there, but I think that we will overcome it. People still have confidence in the Ghanaian economy.
Mr. Akwaboah, in the short to medium term, what do you expect government to do that you believe would stimulate growth and at the same time ensure that there is confidence for you as businessmen?
Well, I think government started a couple of things last year. The stimulus package, some reliefs in terms of electricity, in terms of water. That has its time. I think it's expired now.
How significant were those actions?
They were significant. They were significant, especially at the very small enterprise level. You know, at the very small enterprise level, the relief gave people a bit of support to be able to stand on their own. But I must admit that not everyone got it. And naturally, you wouldn't expect everyone to get it because the numbers were huge.
But
so
give me a sense of your
impact.
membership that was able to access, you know, the facility from government. Because I know there were supposed to be two tiers. The one which had a certain cap, and then the one which had a larger threshold for businesses that were operating at a certain level. How many of your members were able to access this facility? I mean, percentage-wise.
So I think that the best way to put it is how many enterprises were able to access it. And that kind of figure, we'll get it from the MBSSI. But I know that in the database, over 800,000 enterprises applied. I know that at some point, more than 200,000 enterprises have received something, and they were going up to the next level. The 200,000 that I mentioned are the very small enterprise who got some small cities, but it made an impact. You know, for the typical small store operator who is on the roadside, if you give him 5,000, 2,000, it's an impact that you make. Then at the relatively bigger level where people are getting 10,000, 50,000, 100,000 and the rest, the numbers were not that big, but also people had it. And the good thing is that it was across the country. So every enterprise in different parts of the country got access to it. They didn't limit it to Accra. They used an electronic system. So that was very helpful. The relatively bigger ones was actually launched latter part of the year, around October thereabout. And that was the facility it was a guarantee facility that the banks could provide to their enterprises, to their big businesses. So they could access as much as 15 million Ghana cedis. But in that case, it has to be approved by your bank. Your bank must be prepared to deal, and then the bank can then apply it to government for the guarantee. That, in any way, I mean, it's a way of cushioning them, and they could apply as much as 80% of that. So people started applying. I don't know. I don't have the figures now. So at different levels, you know, these measures were put in place, and that for me was quite helpful. Now, going into this year, the next, you know, quarter or two, I think that first of all, the key thing, you talked about confidence, and the confidence level is important. And one way to ensure higher confidence level is that the macroeconomic environment must be stable. There's a lot of, you even mentioned it, high debt that we are confronted with, debt to GDP ratio being over 70%, and a lot of, you know, uncertainties in the forex,
the depreciation of the city,
and all these are challenges that we are confronted with. But I think for the past few years, there's been significant stability in the macroeconomic environment, and people are concerned that what is going to happen this year, now that the elections are over, and we have this debt overhang, and we have, you know, pandemic confronting us, the global economy is all affected. What is going to happen to Ghana? And if we don't manage it well, what is going to happen to one business? So if you are talking of confidence level, that is where we have a tricky situation, where government should be able to manage the situation such that the macro indicators will be in good shape. The debt has to be managed in a way that doesn't virtually destroy everything that we're doing, because we pay virtually all our money we generate into debt and interest and amortization around it. And then also we have had consistent drop, at least stabilized the policy rate. Can we be sure that the next quarter that is going to happen? I think from all indications we're able to do that. What is going to be the inflation rate within this period? If we're able to keep it within reasonable range, people are going to be comfortable with that. And then if eventually it translates into lower interest rates, these are the factors that instill confidence in the business man. And I believe that from what we've had so far, government is very, very likely to do that. So when you do that, then you can have good confidence level.
All right, now let's talk about your key partners when it comes to your ability to thrive or not. And that's the banking sector. We're being told the banking sector is robust enough to support you. From your day-to-day dealing with the banks, are they robust enough? Are they liquid enough to support you, even if COVID-19, we have a vaccine today?
Well, I think the banking sector, they've been very supportive. The challenge we've had is with the interest rate and also access to long-term funding. So if they can have this funding, if they can be liquid to provide this long-term funding, then businesses, I think, will run with it. Usually what they provide is a short-term funding. So if you want to set up a factory, for instance, you can't go and borrow for just 1 year and then pump into a factory. It takes about 5 years for you to even to realize some level of revenue. So people will just borrow short-term to finance long-term funding. In the end, they will not be able to pay, because you start getting revenue after 5 years, but you are supposed to pay for the money within 1 year, and that has also contributed to the higher non-performing loans. I think that now is quite resilient. We've been able to clean up most of the difficulties, the liquidity difficulties that most banks were facing, and I think the government did very well, because the lifeblood for every business is money, and for every economy is money, and how well the banking sector performs. If the government had not come in to stabilize and ensure that we have cleaned up the banking sector, the economy would have collapsed because you don't get the money. And the moment people lose confidence in your financial system, in your economy, it means that people will not even invest. So for me, it's a good thing, and I'm sure that for now it's resilient. What they have to do is probably get more liquid assets to ensure that they'll be able to provide this long-term funding for businesses, and also work on the interest rate. If you look at the interest rate, sometimes I get surprised, even within our neighborhood. Our interest rate is about the highest in the world. The last time I checked, is about the 5th highest. So sometimes when you talk to investors and they ask about your interest rate and you mention it, they get surprised. So how do business borrow at, let's say, 25% or 30% and be able to make profit?
But that's why it beats my imagination, because we're always being told that the monetary policy rate is coming down. I mean, 14.5% presently. You'd expect that the amount at which they are being lent, the banks, would reflect in how much they are also lending to you. So when I hear that, you know, the rate at which you borrow is still high, with monetary policy rate around 14.5 or so, how does that happen?
Well, a lot of things goes into the computation of lending rate by a bank, the risk profile of the individual companies, the cost of operating those banks. So a lot of things. I have had cause to complain about the linkage between the policy rate and the lending rate, because you see the lending rate coming down, as you really said, the policy rate coming down, and the lending rate is still high. You go to the banks and they have a further explanation that I'm giving a facility to this person. I feel that the person is too risky and such, I should put something on it just to take care of my risk. But I think collectively we need to look at how some of the risks probably may be a perceived risk. How do we ensure that we have actual risk instead of perceived risk, so that we can make the banks accountable to whatever they are doing? So we need to collectively look at it. What constitutes the risk? The excuse is that they take the money and they don't pay. Now, there are a lot of things that are going on. The national ID system that will ensure that you are able to identify you, the digital housing system. These are all some of the things that government is doing to ensure.
Do we have a credit bureau in this country?
We have a credit bureau, but I don't think they are working very well. And I don't think the banks, the last time I checked, the banks are also supporting to ensure that they are very effective, as to whether they provide information to the bureau to the extent that a bank can go and check on the credit reference of an individual or an organization. I'm not too sure of it. I don't know how it's working now, but these are some of the things that when we put in place, it will ensure that we reduce the risk and also reduce the lending rate as well. Otherwise, we will keep on having the policy rate coming down. In other jurisdictions, the moment the policy rate comes down, you see other rates following up, but we've not had that. So interest rates in Ghana are very sticky downwards. But the moment it goes up, you see that the banks will increase their interest rate as well. So we need to collectively look at how we can reduce the risk and ensure that the lending rate follows the downfall or the reduction in the policy rate.
But if I may chip in concerning the financial angle to things, and I'm very much in agreement with what my colleague has said. When it comes to the financial landscape, government still borrows a lot, and therefore competing with the private sector. And because if the banks trade in money, their stock of trade is money. So if you don't have anybody taking it, then you have no choice than to reduce the interest rate for others to take it. So I think that government borrowing will have to be watched going forward. Secondly,
the government is your competitor in terms of...
Yes, in terms of taking money from the commercial banks.
And it's more secure for these banks to lend to the government than to lend to you.
Exactly.
The government is risk-free.
So the risk level is much lower there, and then the enterprise are considered to be merely higher risk enterprise, and therefore naturally when you are giving to them, it must be that risk premium that makes the price very high. The other aspect is that the nature of our financial sector, and it's a known fact that our banks also complain that the kind of deposit they are largely short-term. So if I'm taking monies on short-term basis, I cannot learn long-term, and that becomes a problem. And that is why we've been advocating for the establishment of a development bank. And talking about the funding arrangement for the year, government has already put in the budget that they're going to establish the development bank. And in the last budget that was read, it was mentioned again. So we are anticipating and we are expecting that this year, as soon as the Minister for Finance comes to office, we'll start working towards it. The idea is to provide medium to long-term funding, especially for industries, at a rates that are competitive. And that is what will enable us to do the big-ticket business, do the long-term, medium to long-term business at rates that, you know, are good to be able to take advantage of the market opportunities. If you rely on the normal banking arrangement, which is largely commercial lending, you'll be borrowing at short term, you'll be borrowing at very high interest cost, and therefore you are always at a competitive disadvantage. The short term kind of funding has its own advantages, or I mean has its place in the marketplace. It is more for short term business. If you are buying raw materials, if you are paying labor, if you are paying electricity, working capital, you can go and borrow that kind of money. But if you want to do medium to long term, the kind of investment that our businesses want to do, taking advantage of the CFTA, you want to expand, you want to buy new machines and all that. You need a moratorium of 6 months to 1 year. Most banks will not give you that. So I think that if we are able to implement the development bank concept, it will help a great deal.
Well, we'll go for a short breather, and when we come back, there's a very thorny one that awaits us to try and discuss, which has to do with our debt portfolio and what it means for us if we should decide to go out there to go and borrow. Equally, is it important for us to see whether the government will be looking at internally generating funds? Just last week, the Ghana Revenue Authority indicated that they intend to, raise over 66 million. Now, where are they going to get the money from? It would obviously be through taxes. Would we look forward to more taxes coming from government, or would we look forward to more reliefs from government to ensure these businesses thrive? That's where the conversation would focus on when we are back from this commercial break. You're welcome back. This is Fact Sheet live on ETV, live on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And we're talking about economy from the perspective of business. And prior to going for the commercial break, I was asking to tax more or to give more reliefs. Now, I am looking at a picture where government, with a debt portfolio of about 286 billion, with a debt to GDP, of about, more than 70. If government decides to go and look for money outside, for instance, to go for bonds, obviously, the coupon rates of these bonds would be high. And so government may decide to look internally for, money. How would government do that? I am thinking maybe they might decide to tax more to generate revenue internally. And so I ask Mr. Akwaboah, where do we go? To tax more or to give reliefs?
Well, I think it's a chicken and egg situation. Government would want to give relief, but the government needs money to do that. Already the businesses are struggling, and you want to give them relief. So you don't tax them more, right, to further burden them. What I propose they do is to expand the tax net. There are so many people who are doing economic activities, but they are not paying taxes. As I speak to you, the recent data indicate that less than 2 million out of close to 18 million people that are supposed to pay taxes are paying taxes. So the rest, what are they doing? Probably they are the ones that are also enjoying most of this relief. So I will encourage that the Ministry of Finance, the GIA, should look to more innovative way of bringing a lot of people into the tax net. If each and every one who's supposed to pay tax is paying his or her bit, a little bit, then I'm sure that we get a lot of revenue. We all have to come together to make sure that this debt that we have there, we pay. Because it will be on us until our generation comes. So what and which way do we have to go to pay is what we need to look at. But I will not support an increment in existing taxes around this time that businesses are suffering. Businesses are not against payment of taxes, but some taxes that are probably, if you're not careful, they'll end up killing businesses. So around the time of COVID, we actually asked for some tax waivers. We asked for temporary tax relief so that whilst we are struggling, we'll be able to have some money out of our sales to reinvest into our business. So if you tax them, you end up killing businesses. And mind you, about close to 90% of businesses in Ghana are SMEs, and they are the ones that are the hardest hit when it comes to this COVID. So if you are going to tax them more, you end up killing them. So I will go for an expansion of the tax nets. Property tax, we keep on saying, what is government doing about it? I know that GIA is working on some form of digital system to be able to get a lot of people into the tax net. I think it's a good idea. These are the innovative areas that I refer to that we need to look at.
Well, yeah, I think there is two sides to the equation. There is the income side and the expenditure side. The income side is the how money is going to be generated in the form of taxes and other means to support your budget deficit. The other side of it is the expenditure side. So government will also have to look into its expenditure profile and see areas that they can possibly cut off after the elections are over. So you have a bit of room to maneuver. So where it is possible to reduce your expenditure and then be more prudent and efficient in your management, I think that should be done so that you reduce the burden on you as a means of ensuring that you keep stability in the system. On the other hand, if the revenue has to go up, yes, you are right. We have to look internally first. But looking internally does not mean that businesses should be killed, because it's these same businesses that generate the taxes. And therefore, you got to be very innovative in the kind of tax system that you introduce. And of course, I'll support the idea of the widening the tax net. But indeed, a lot of, as he said, 2%, 2 million people are the ones targeted to be paying tax and 15 million are not paying. It's not that they are not paying. It's actually the indirect tax versus the direct tax. The direct tax are easily identifiable groups. So those ones, you target them. And unfortunately, that is where we are always targeting. So the well-established, well-organized, properly registered businesses become the target. But it shouldn't be so. Those that are not within that bracket could also be targeted. But you can introduce indirect taxes that virtually everybody pays. And indeed, even those that are not seen in the direct tax bracket, they are all paying indirect tax if you have, I don't want to be mentioning some of them here, but there are ways of doing that. So I think government can be creative in introducing certain areas of taxes that will not affect businesses directly, because you rather need to stimulate the business arrangement so that more businesses will grow, and then they will employ more people. If the people are employed and they are getting their revenues, they can even pay more taxes through income tax and all that. So you got to be creative and innovative about it. Also check your expenditure to reduce your expenditure burden.
Final question. Some people say that the business industry has not taken advantage of COVID-19 in terms of the benefits that could have accrued for us in terms of our local economy. That with less importation, the expectation was that we would have taken the challenge to rather manufacture in this country, so that by the time, let's say, COVID is done, because most countries across the world are looking at feeding their populations now. And so we could have taken advantage of that to empower ourselves and build ourselves to the extent that our local economies would be ready to sustain the economy. But that has not been the case.
Yeah, but you see, one lesson we've learned from the COVID situation is exactly what you said. How do we ensure that we have adequate local production, at least when it comes to the critical and essential products, instead of relying on imports at all times?
What made it difficult?
Yes. No. So the difficulty is that you don't overnight change all factors of production. It doesn't happen anywhere. So what happens is that when you want to change factors of production, there are some of the factors that are short-run factors. So if it is labor, you can easily recruit people and then grow and expand. When it comes to raw materials, maybe you can check other sources, and if your current source is not enough, you can check other sources and increase. If it is running shift to be able to do other, you can do it. But buying new machines, okay, to expand, building new factories and all that, it doesn't take overnight. You don't have the money locked up in the vault somewhere that you just pick and start doing all these things. It takes a while to get even access to medium to long-term capital to grow your factory, expand, and then take advantage of all the opportunities that are coming. So the opportunities may come, but you may not be able to fully take advantage of it. It takes a little while.
But
we should work towards it.
Even
That's
begin exploring?
Of course, that is the most important thing, and that's the question. And I think for that, our businesses are smart business people, so they are exploring. I mean, when it comes to the sanitizer production, for example, look at how quickly our cosmetic industry turn around. Even our companies producing beverages, alcoholic beverages, their core business was not producing sanitizer. Casapreko, Akrabiri, and all those who ended up producing sanitizer, they were never producing sanitizers. But the base product for all this is the alcohol. They had alcohol in stock for the alcoholic beverages. So suddenly, and they have the machine line, so they quickly did that. So within that short period, for those factors which could be changed, they changed it and took advantage of it. So I think we should trust the Ghanaian business man to have some smart thinking and arrangement, and they could do something. But it's not everything that can be changed within that short period. So those that cannot be changed within that short period, you do have to take a bit of time, but eventually you will be able to get there. So I believe that people are exploring, people are thinking, people are looking for opportunities, they are looking for partners, and they will be taking advantage of the market. But it also means that we should develop our economy and our system such that when there is an opportunity, the ease with which we should be able to harness those opportunities should be there. Because if you see immediate opportunity and you can go to a bank and the bank is prepared to give you a couple of millions and they say, oh, you don't need to start paying until 6 months, so moratorium of 6 months, then you quickly take advantage and expand. But if you don't have that opportunity of accessing medium to long-term funds from the banks immediately, how do you take advantage of it? So these are the things that we need to look at. And if you had a development bank managed by people who are prepared to take a bit of risk with government backing and all that, then some of this opportunity, when it comes your way, you really harness it.
Mr. Waju, we have just 2 minutes to round up our conversation. What would you tell the finance minister if he's approved? Should be his major concern immediately he's approved?
Yeah, for me, his major concern is to implement the Care or Batampa program that was launched somewhere around October with an amount of over 100 billion Ghana cedis. And that particular program is intended to stabilize, revitalize, and transform our economy to create jobs. In it is a support for businesses and for support for private sector. If we can do that immediately, then it has the potential to transform our economy. Secondly, I think they should also look at how they can do targeted supporting system for certain industries that have the potential to transfer economy. In fact, with after coming on board, we also need to look at it. What are the areas that, or the industry that we have competitive advantage? Now the market is there. How do we take advantage of this market? So the companies that were struggling to get markets, a research we did, the Chamber Business Force indicated that, for instance, the SMEs, they have a growth prospect. So their sales are constantly increasing, but they are not resilient. Just a shock, and they will collapse. And we all saw it when this pandemic came. And the bigger companies, they are resilient, they are looking for market, but they are not getting it because most economies either using tariffs or non-tariff barriers were protecting their market. Now the market is there. How do we take advantage of? There are industries or businesses or sectors that we already have that advantage, the pharmaceutical industries, the cosmetic industries, the agro-processing. How do we support these particular industries to ensure that they are competitive and to be able to enter into the African market? I really agree with him. The development bank is key, but I hope that is not going to be like the development bank that we have set up, but they are not providing the support that they are supposed to provide to specific sectors of the economy. I don't want to mention, some were set up to provide support to the industry. The question is, are they doing that? Some were set up to provide support to the agricultural sector. Are they doing that? What is this new development bank going to do? Is it going to operate just like the ones that we are having, that over years they turn into commercial banking and they don't do what they are intended to do? So this is one challenge for the finance minister, and of course, not taxing businesses so much in 2021.
Mr. Mark Bedu Abaji, I'm grateful you joined me this morning. Mr. Seth Twum Akwaboah, I'm grateful you joined me this evening. Sorry, I keep saying morning, but I'm grateful you joined me tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, folks, tonight to have helped me to discuss the issues have been Mr. Seth Twum Akwaboah, he's the CEO for the AGI, and Mr. Magbedu Abuaju, who is the CEO for the National Chamber of Commerce and Industry. We've been talking about business prospect for 2021, growth, innovation, sustainability, and profitability. This has been Fact Sheet live on ETV, live on Facebook and Twitter as well. Tomorrow, God willing, at 10, there'll be a replay of the show on ATV. I encourage you to always join the conversation. Until then, I wish you a blessed evening and good night.